Hello, my name is Phil Wilson. I'm a teaching artist with Arts for All, a nonprofit that works hard to get art and art experiences, cultural experiences of all sorts into the lives of people with all abilities. And today we're going to start a short series of videos that will help you play with modeling clay right at home. You can make all kinds of cool stuff and remake this cool stuff time after time to show your friends and family. This is our modeling clay, and before we start working with it, I should mention a number of things about this that might not be familiar to you. One thing you can see is immediately is it has this fabulous color. The clay that we usually use is just that sort of drab gray. This clay has this fabulous color. It's not real clay, remember. It's kind of a synthetic clay, a fake clay, you might say, but it's lovely stuff. So it's beautiful color. Another thing you're going to notice is that instead of the cold clay that we usually start with, this clay really needs to start warm, and you'll notice as you work with it that it gets warmer just from the warmth of your hands. When you're about to make something with this clay, it's a good idea for it to be stored in a warm place. The warmer it is, the more flexible it'll be right from the beginning. Another cool thing about this clay is that it never needs to be fired. Usually our gray clay, we make a thing, it has to dry, it has to go into a kiln and get fired to make it hard. This clay never needs to be fired. And because it's not fired, it'll never get hard. That is kind of a nice thing because it allows you to use the same clay over and over again to make lots of different stuff. Whatever you make, you can enjoy for as long as you want, but when you're finished and you're ready to make a different thing, you can take the very same clay and make a completely different thing because it'll still be soft, and you'll be able to take that thing that you've made apart and use the same clay to use over and over again. So when you begin to make something, you can take a piece of this clay, and it's a little bit stiff, and the more you bend it and move it around and manipulate it, the softer it'll get. It sort of relaxes as you work with it, and the warmth from your hands makes it warmer, and that makes it softer. So you can start just by bending it and twisting it and scrunching it around, and you'll feel after a while that it gets softer and nicer and less hard. And that means you don't have to work so hard with your fingers to make a thing, okay? Now, let me remind you that as you work with it, you'll see that it also is very similar to the gray clay we usually work with. We're going to work with it in the same sorts of ways that we usually work with the gray clay. And to start out, I'd like just to remind you of a couple of ways that we use the clay to form it, to make lots of different things. One thing that we've done many times is to use the clay just to make a ball. And so after you've bent it around and it's getting softer and more flexible, you can squish it together with your fingers and just roll it. You can put your one hand on the table, put your other flat hand on top, and roll your hands together that way. You can use your flat hand to just roll it on the table like this. And if you do this, you know what's a good thing? To use both hands. Maybe you're used to using this one hand all the time. See what happens if you use your other hand and try to do the same thing with your other hand. That teaches your hands, both hands, how to work with the clay. So now we've made a simple ball. And remember, one of the simple things we can do with the ball is to make it flat. And a flat piece of clay, you may remember, we call a slab. So we've made a ball. Now let's make a slab. And the simplest way to do that with our gray clay or this clay is just to use our flat hand to press on the clay, flip it over, flatten it some more. You can use both hands and that makes even more pressure. And if you stand up, you'll find that your two hands are even stronger to flatten and flip and flatten and flip. So try that. Try flipping and flattening several times, and you'll see it gets bigger and bigger and flatter. And that, remember, we call a slab. There are other ways to make that slab even bigger and even flatter. One obvious thing to use is a rolling pin, which you might find in your kitchen. And remember, any tools that you use while you're working with this clay, you can easily wash. So it's okay to use a rolling pin. If there's a problem with a rolling pin or you don't have one, you could find any other hard round thing, like a bottle, and use that in the same way. And just like when you're using your hands, if you flip it over once in a while so you're flattening both sides, that's good too. Oh, look at that, it's stuck. No problem, because it'll peel right off. So now we've made a slab. So that's two things. I would like us to remember one more thing. So we made a slab. That's the second thing we did. We also made a ball. And I'd like us to remind us a third way that we usually manipulate our clay to make stuff, and that is with a line. So there's a ball, there's a slab. Now we're going to make a line. And the same way we started with the other two, we're first going to just manipulate the clay a little bit to loosen it up, to soften it up, to make it easier to play with. So just scrunch it around, twist it, bend it back and forth, and you'll feel after a while it gets softer and softer. The good thing about this is that it's going to make your fingers stronger, and it's going to make you better able to use your fingers and hands for all kinds of other stuff, including art and including making stuff with clay. So after you've bent it and twisted it and scrunched it around and it's softer, then remember the way we usually make a line is, again, to start with our flat hand, put the clay on our flat hand, take your other flat hand, put them together, and just roll back and forth. You can roll them in the air. If that's a little difficult, you can put one hand right on the table and push with your flat hand against the other flat hand. And again, try to use both of your hands in different ways so they get used to working with each other. You can also roll right on the table, same way, with just a flat hand, rolling back and forth. When you're rolling, if you stop and see one area is thinner and one area is thicker, then you can just roll the thick area. And that'll make it evener, right? You can even start using two hands. And one game you can play is just to see how long a line you can make. The more you roll it, the longer it gets. Just remember to keep your hands flat and straight, and you don't need to push down very hard. If you were rolling a pencil, because a pencil is round, you don't have to push down hard to roll a pencil. And clay is the same way. If you just keep your fingers and hands straight and flat, you can make a very long, lovely line. And of course, you can manipulate that line in all kinds of ways. It can be a straight line, it can be a wiggly line, it can be a smiley line. All kinds of things can happen with these lines. And we'll play with lines and with slabs and with balls in future videos and show you how to make lots of different cool stuff with just these three basic ways of forming clay.